Good evening. How are you all? This week we experienced warmer and sunshine, isn't it? And we thank God for His provision and His blessings. And I pray that He will continue to bless us with His presence and to fill us with His love, joy, and peace. We've been studying the book of Exodus with the story of a chosen people who were enslaved in Egypt, a heathen country. And then after 400 plus years, the people who were Abraham's descendants were brought out of the country. And during this many years in Egypt, they had lost a lot of their identity and faith. The survival of these people depended on their transformation from the heathen culture they were accustomed to and returning to the faith of their forefather. Last chapter it says, God tested them. Did they need it to be tested, to be His people? The word test in Hebrew is N-A-S-A, meaning prove, attempt, try. My understanding of the meaning, according to the context, is God was trying to train them, trying to prove their ability so they can truly become His people and bless the world. And we will notice in these chapters, there's a repeated cycle of complaint of the people, instructions from the Lord, and God's provision. And we'll continue tonight in chapter 16. And I hope we can learn from it and can apply the lesson to our life. Let's go to verse 1. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." The Israelite has been journeying for a month and a half now, and now they are at Desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. They started to complain against Moses and Aaron for not having enough meat and bread to eat. They grumbled about how good they had it in Egypt. How sad it is that they prefer to be a slave under Pharaoh rather than a free man under God. I really doubt that they had pots of meat and all they wanted to eat while they were being enslaved in Egypt. Let's move on to verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instruction. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." God is patient, and He understands that these people have been under the influence of Egyptian culture for a long, long time. And He used this grumbling as an opportunity to educate the Israelite to trust Him, to follow His instructions. The Lord told Moses that He will rain down bread from heaven, and the people will gather enough for each day for 5 days. And on the 6th day, they will gather twice as much. At this point, it was not told why they had to do it this way. They needed to learn to trust God. And in verse 4, God said, "In this way, I will test them to prove their ability and see whether they will follow my instructions." So we see that God's intention was to form the Israelite into a people who would bless the world through the way they live. God was preparing them for the more comprehensive instruction at Sinai. Verse 6. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord? Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the anti-Israelite communities, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. This passage seems to have repeated instructions. There was a God-given instruction that was revealed to Aaron by Moses, and then Aaron to the people. So what is the communication? God wanted his people to recognize and remember that it was God and no one else responsible for their exodus and their desert journey. Verses 6 to 12 emphasize God was their leader. Let's look at it. Verse 6, you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. Verse 7, you will see the glory of the Lord. Verse 8, you will know that it was the Lord. Verse 9, come before the Lord. Verse 10, there was the glory of the Lord. Verse 12, then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Can you see that? It was difficult for the children of Israel to believe God was in their midst and that he was the one who was providing for them. Because of that, a scholar suggested that these people who had been set free from bondage were at risk of misunderstanding their freedom and were eventually turning their freedom into a new form of self-chosen bondage. You see, they were free from Egypt's physical labor and political restraints, but they didn't realize there was a purpose for that. God had a purpose for their freedom as a people. And because of their misunderstanding, they were at risk of poor decisions that could harm them. And we'll see in this chapter that God was starting to set up rules and structures for the children so they could start to learn God's purpose for them. Moses and Aaron recognized their ignorance and the risk of making terrible decisions. So they had to first clarify to the people that they were not their leaders and God is. Moses told the people twice when they grumbled against him, who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. You see, although the people had seen God's mighty acts manifested in Egypt and at the Red Sea crossing, so they knew God could take life and give life, and that he was the one in control of the nature. But their challenge was believing that he is also the provider of their everyday needs, like water and food. At Mara, they probably thought Moses was responsible to change the bitter water into drinkable water. So, with the food problem, they thought Moses should be the one who is responsible for it. Therefore, they complained to him and his brother. We are a bit like them, isn't it? When there are great problems, we pray to God because only he could help us to solve big problems. However, everyday needs are our responsibility and perhaps even our government's. But we should realize that all our ability and all the opportunities that we have come from God. So what did God do? God connected his glory in the cloud to his provision of bread and meat. Moses told the people, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, and you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he heard your grumbling against him. Here, Moses clarified, God is their leader who provides for them. The bread and the meat are connected to God's glory, and they will be the witness of it. Moses told Aaron to gather the people together and instruct them to look toward the desert, and they'll see the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. So you might have a question. Back in chapter 13, verse 21, didn't it say that God went ahead of the people to guide them daytime with a pillar of cloud and nighttime with a pillar of fire? Yes. But it seems like the people wasn't able to connect these signs with God's presence until this chapter, when they actually saw the presence of God in the cloud. The Lord was trying to instruct them that he was the Lord who not only through mighty acts defeated their enemy and caused the Red Sea to part for them to escape, but he is also the provider of their daily needs. Verse 13, that evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. The passage mentioned the quail only briefly, but focuses instead on the manna, right? You see that? Which became a continual sign of God's presence. Let me repeat again. Manna actually became a continual sign of God's presence. Manna was the children of Israel's source of food for 40 years. So what is manna? The word manna actually means, what is it? The Bible said when you look at it at a glance, it looks like a layer of dew, but they are thin flakes like frost on the ground. The people didn't know what it was first, and Moses told them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." And he gave them 4 instructions. Number 1, take an omer for each person you have in your tent. An omer is the volume of 43.2 chickens' eggs, about 3.4 to 3.9 pounds. But then there are other scholars that it is about the size of a quart, the volume of a quart. And then the other says that it's about a cup, so we really don't know. Well, nevertheless, the amazing thing is that the people gather the manna anyhow, and they gather it randomly. And some gather more, and some other, some people less, right? But when they measure the amount gathered per tent at the end of the day, there was 1 omer of manna per person. Second instruction. Moses told them, "Do not keep any of it until the morning." But some of them didn't pay attention to what Moses said, and they kept it until the morning. And when the morning came, the manna was full of maggots and began to smell. We see that the Lord, in teaching the people, he built a natural consequence for them when they don't pay attention to his instruction. In verse 4, God said, remember, he will test them or to prove their ability to follow instructions. God's intention was to help the people to learn to trust him daily. And the third and the fourth instruction pertains to the manna will be in the following verses. Let me read. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omer for each person, and the leader of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake, and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day. So what is the third instruction? The third instruction is people, it sounded like they have to gather the manna before a certain time of the day because the flakes will melt and disappear when the sun became hot. And the fourth instruction of the manna training is about Sabbath rest. Moses told the people that on the 6th day, they should gather double the amount. That means they were to gather 2 omers per person instead of 1 omer per person. They may bake or boil as much as they want to on the 6th day, but they have to set aside the second portion for the next day, the Sabbath day. On the Sabbath day, there will be no food on the ground for them to collect, and they will eat what they had collected on the day before, because the 7th day is Sabbath, and it is dedicated to the Lord. The passage said some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather manna, and they found nothing. God told them, "How long will you all refuse to keep my commands and my instructions?" God was trying to convince them to change their ways. He was explaining to them that the Sabbath is from him. In essence, it's a gift from him. So what is this gift? A gift of rest and the surplus bread. We can clearly see that God was teaching them through manna valuable lessons to show them that about his glory, to train them to trust, and to give them a source of daily bread as well as weekly rest. These lessons were necessary for their success in bringing blessings to all the people of the earth. This first observation of the Sabbath not only provided a paradigm of working and resting, but it also established the previous forgotten 7-day week. We can see the impact of this paradigm even now in our culture. So, resting on the seventh day means we trust in the Lord to provide. Resting demonstrates trust in God for daily needs and an acceptance of this gift. Verse 23 says, the seventh day was a holy Sabbath to the Lord. That means resting on this day acknowledges the work of God's holiness in our life. Furthermore, in keeping the Sabbath reminds us that holiness is not earned or inherent, but is a gift from the Lord. The people receive the Lord's holiness by doing nothing. Later on in chapter 31:13, God told the people, "You must observe my Sabbath. This will be a sign between me and you and for generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy." Now the following verses 31 to 36, are an editorial postscript according to scholars. So there's some repetition there. Verse 31. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafer made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt." So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for generations to come." As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law, so that it might be preserved. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. Like I mentioned, these verses are an editorial postscript. The manna was so important part in the formation of Israel's early relationship with God that Moses was instructed to give an omer in a jar and put it with the tablet of laws in the Ark of the Covenant. It was a visible remembrance to the glory of the Lord given on that first hungry morning. Furthermore, it would serve as a reminder of the Lord's instruction of the Sabbath gift even before Sinai. The people ate the manna for 40 years until they reached the border of Canaan. In summary, I have 3 observations. Perhaps you have more, but these are my 3. Number 1, do you notice that in the Bible, bread is mentioned quite a few times? We just study manna, and it signifies God's presence. And then in the New Testament, bread symbolizes the body of Christ, denotes that it has life-giving property to those who receive it. My second observation, God is patient, and he takes time to teach his people. When Aaron told the people to come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling, we readers probably thinking of judgment from God, right? But as you read on in this chapter, there was no judgment, but instead the instruction of look, and there was the glory of the Lord. And afterward, they were informed, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. God was teaching them who he is. Third observation, resting of the seventh day, meaning we trust in the Lord to provide. Resting demonstrates trust in God for daily needs and an acceptance of this gift. Also, in keeping the Sabbath reminds us that holiness is not earned or inherent, but a gift from the Lord. The people receive the Lord's holiness by doing nothing. And later on in chapter 31, verse 13, God told the people, "You must observe my Sabbath. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy." Happy Sabbath.